Well, good evening and welcome to the Starting Point Project's live stream broadcast for April 2020. We're certainly glad that you joined us. A lot going on in the world around us, including the virus, which is still here. We're all dealing with it. That's why I appreciate that you are taking the time to watch this program. It's affected pretty much every area of all of our lives, especially us here at the ministry, and changed a lot of things that we've been doing. Have to do a lot of live stream broadcasts like this for conferences instead of being there live. And this does tie into tonight's topic. If you were with us last month, I tied it in then too. I'm going to repeat a little bit of that in just a bit. But I also announce our next program, which we don't know largely because of the virus. It's changing a few things that we're doing here. We've got to do some other video shoots here in the studio coming up. So we're not quite sure what we're doing next month. But once we decide, we will put it in our newsletter. So if you're not on our newsletter, if you're watching from Facebook or YouTube or whatever, you can go to our website, thestartingpointproject.com, and right on the homepage, click newsletter, sign up, and then you'll be notified once we decide what it is that we're actually going to be doing. We also announced for the first time last month our streaming videos. We took all of our DVDs, converted them to a streaming format. So again, you can go to our website and click on products. From there, you can choose resources. That'll take you to a page like this where you see streaming. Click on streaming. It takes you to the page where it has all of our DVDs listed there that are available for streaming. You can buy them individually or buy a package where you get all 10 that we have so far, and we'll be adding more to those as time goes on. Also, our Rim and Raft Grand Canyon Tour, the current one is sold out, but we did add some dates for next year, 2021, May 27th through the 30th, and August 19th through the 22nd. They're awesome trips. I've talked about them in the past, so I'm not going to go over it much now, but if you're interested in learning more, go to our website and you can get a lot more information there. We're also doing for the first time a Mount St. Helens trip in August. That's going to be awesome. A number of different speakers. We're doing different tours there, hiking tours and giving lectures, basically talking about what happened in 1980. That gives us a big clue as to what also probably happened back during the flood. This is what it looks like now. Beautiful area. It's going to be a great time to be outdoors. Go to our website, again, click on events, scroll down and choose the Mount St. Helens tour, and that'll give you all the details that you need there. Now, tonight's show, which is what you tuned in for, I'm sure you already know what the topic is. It's going to be climate change, part 2, a rational discussion. I was thinking of maybe doing part 2 as an irrational discussion, but there's enough of that going on. We'll keep it to rationality as much as we can. And rabbit trails. That's why I put the picture up here. As I was doing research for part 2 here, just got down the path of so many rabbit trails. There's so much information out there, and you start reading an article and there's a link to another article which leads to another one, and then a video, and then a series of videos, and just on and on. It was actually kind of exhausting sorting through all that because I obviously didn't get to see everything, but just wanted to put highlights together for this part 2. And again, it was just very challenging what to include and what to leave out. And then tying this in with the virus again, there's just a lot of commonality there. First of all, with the virus is real. We certainly are not denying that there is a virus going on right now. Important question is, what is the nature of the effects of this virus? Is it incredibly bad? Is it mild? Is it what? We need to answer that question. We're still looking into it. And then, is our response to it appropriate? We have to know what the effects are to know whether our response is appropriate. That'd be a whole nother topic, and don't get me started. I'm really not happy with our response. I think it was very drastic to begin with, but probably necessary because we didn't know what we're dealing with. I think we have a better feel for what we're dealing with now and maybe could do things differently, but that's my opinion, and it's a different topic. I also think there's a tie-in with the whole creation evolution controversy. The changes we see in animals and humans are real. There are real changes going on. No one denies that. But the question becomes, how much change and what kind of change? And can these changes actually transform one kind of animal into another? When you look at it in depth, there's just no way. Again, that's another topic, but there's similarities here between creation and evolution and the virus, and also with our topic of global warming and climate change. And climate change falls under the larger umbrella of environmentalism. A lot of issues going on in environmentalism. Climate change is just one of them. And just this week, I stumbled upon something. You're all familiar with the red letter edition of the Bible. Those are the versions of the Bible where all the words of Jesus are in red. Kind of helpful as you're seeing something in red, you instantly know those are words that Jesus himself spoke. Well, saw another Bible that came out recently. It's the green Bible. Wow, that's interesting. What's that all about? Well, all the words that have to do with the environment are highlighted in green. So this passage, Genesis 27, the end of it talks about Abraham taking possession of the land there. That's in green. And so anything about animals or the environment is highlighted in green. It's interesting concept, but someone's taking advantage of that probably monetarily with a whole climate change thing to come out with a Bible for that. I'm not really big on that, and there's a lot else we could say about that, but I got to keep moving here. This is what we're going to be hitting for this particular show. We're in the intro right now, and we're going to do a little bit of a review of part one. We'll do some leftovers and add some new things, and then wind up with our conclusion again. Now, the intro and review. We didn't talk about it actually too much last time, but this whole concept of settled science, you've heard that used, especially with climate change. I mean, it happens with creation and evolution and other topics as well, but especially with climate change and global warming, it's settled science. We don't even have to look into it anymore. We just know it. Well, it's kind of an intimidating statement that people don't always know how to respond to. Here's an interesting quote from Richard Feynman. He's an American theoretical physicist. He was a sharp guy. He said this: "I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." And when I read that a while back, I thought that's pretty significant, and I would agree with that. I have no problem with knowing there are questions out there that I don't have answers to. Everyone has that. Everyone's in that situation. There are things we just don't have answers to. That's going to happen our entire lives. But I'm not comfortable when someone gives me an answer that can't be questioned. That's typically what we have in our public school systems and state universities, especially when it comes to issues like creation and evolution. Oh, evolution, it's settled science, it's a fact, you don't question it. And somewhat similarly with the whole idea of climate change. Another quote I stumbled upon from George Orwell. He said, "The more society drifts from the truth, the more they will hate those that speak it." I think that's really true, especially from a Christian standpoint. The more we get away from the authority of God's word, the more people hate it when we try to bring them back to the authority of God's word. We say what God has to say about whatever particular topic they're bringing up. People can get pretty agitated about that. And then another quote from an unknown author said, "It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled." I thought that through, and I was like, you know what? I agree with that too. It's pretty easy to fool people. It's pretty easy to fool me, but it's harder to tell people, no, you've been fooled. What you've heard is not true. You've been fooled about it. They're a lot more resistant to that for many different reasons. And a common statement that we hear, I know I hear it, "Oh yeah, you're right, and all the scientists are wrong." Again, it could be many topics: creation, evolution, climate change. Yeah, you're right about your ideas, and all the scientists, yeah, they're actually wrong. We can just ignore them and listen to you. Again, very intimidating statement, and most people aren't quite sure how to respond to that. That's a whole nother topic, but I like to have them focus on what actually is being said and forget for a minute who it was that said something or how many people believe something. Let's actually focus on the claim that's being made and not so much consensus science. Oh, there's so many scientists who say something, so therefore it must be true. Again, I mentioned last month that I'm not here to settle this once and for all. I don't want you to tune in and just say, well, hear what Jay has to say because it's got to be right. No, might be right, might not be right. I tend to think that I'm correct about a lot of these things, but I'm just sharing them with you to help you think through maybe another angle that you haven't heard and to really help you with critical thinking skills. So don't just believe what I'm saying, think it through. Does it make sense? Is there any science behind it? Does it jive with what Scripture says? If you're a Christian, that should be your starting point, God's Word. So does the things that I share here in this show, they fit with Scripture? If not, throw them out. If they do fit, then maybe you could consider them even further. We talked about counter arguments last time, but not those kind of counters. Counter arguments. Everything anyone will ever claim There's always a counter argument. Someone would say, yeah, but what about this? And then there's a counter to the counter argument, and on and on and on. I mentioned that last month. It just keeps getting deeper and deeper. And very quickly, it gets to the point where you're not really quite sure who's right, or may not even understand them anymore because it's just going so deep. So no matter what argument anyone brings up, someone else can always say something. It might not be valid, but there's going to be some kind of a counter argument. Also, this can be a very emotional issue. So keep that in mind when you're talking to people about the topic of climate change or global warming. It can be very emotional for them, and expect that they may respond in course with that. Also, I mentioned perception is reality. We all respond not necessarily to what is true, but what we think is true. And that makes sense. If you think this thing over here is true, you're going to respond accordingly because you think it's true. Even if it's not true, your actions are going to be probably consistent with the fact that you think it's true. So realize, just because someone might be wrong about something doesn't mean that their actions are going to line up with what is right. They're going to continue to probably respond to what they think is correct. We did a climate overview, so I'm not going to spend much time on this at all. We talked about the different layers in the atmosphere. The troposphere is what we are dealing with mostly here with this climate change. Radiation comes in from the sun. It gets trapped by greenhouse gases and can warm the earth, which is it's a good thing. The whole question is it going too far? Is it getting too warm? We talked about all the atmospheric gases. Most of it's nitrogen and oxygen, but then you have the greenhouse gases here. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the show. And then 3 huge questions I brought up last month that are really, really important to address. Number 1, is the climate actually changing? Number 2, if it is changing, is it bad? And number 3, how much of that change, if any, is really caused by human activity? 3 really important questions that we addressed, and we'll look at them a little bit further. This time, a quick review. Is the climate changing? The answer is a definite yes. I personally don't know of anyone who denies that the climate has changed. We went over a brief history. We had a medieval warming period. We had a little ice age after that. The climate has changed over time. Nobody denies that it has actually changed. So the next question is that change bad? That can be a tougher question for people. I gave a simple analogy of someone getting ready to go outside, and let's say it's cold outside. So you watch them put on an undershirt and then a t-shirt and then a sweatshirt. And then you find out they're not going out for another 20 minutes. And so you get nervous. At this rate, they're going to look like the Michelin man. They have too much on. They'll be too warm. They won't be able to move around. They could fall over and freeze to death. Well, what you did is you took an actual process that you observed and assumed that process would continue on for a certain period of time, which would lead to something that is bad. So what many people do today is they notice some changes today, and then they extrapolate that out in their models to say, this is bad. And we'll talk about that more with these models in a little bit. I mentioned that there are benefits to the climate changing, especially to being warmer. Historically, it's been associated with more bountiful harvests and cultures thriving and rise of empires and all that. We didn't talk about photosynthesis, but increased carbon dioxide can be good for plants. You can have a greener earth, and this is how it works. You got some carbon dioxide there on the left. You add that with water that plants take in, and then sunlight that the plants bring in, and it's a good thing. Now, real quick side note here. Some people will use this photosynthesis to say, see, you can just add energy, raw energy from the sun, and things can get better. So on the primeval earth, sunlight's hitting it and things are getting better and life is developing. No, you're missing a huge element here. And that is a very, very complex system to take the raw energy and convert it to something useful. You could take raw energy today like a flamethrower and aim it at your car and douse your car with flames. Is it going to turn into a nice Lamborghini? No, you're going to destroy it. You got plenty of energy, yeah, but you're lacking a system to convert the raw energy into something useful. You have explosions going on in your car all the time, but your engine is able to take that raw energy and convert it into something useful. So you need something very complex like photosynthesis to do this. If you just have raw energy, like before we had photosynthesis, according to evolution, you can't just take the raw energy and make things better. It's actually going to be going the opposite direction, but that's a whole nother topic. So we take this photosynthesis, and what does it do? It converts it into some simple sugars, but it's not the kind of sugar we directly use in a Hershey's bar. Otherwise, I'd be eating plants all day long. It's a different kind of sugar that the plants can use as energy. And then the plants give oxygen that we can breathe, which is it's a great system that God has built into our environment. So more CO2, you can get more oxygen, you can have a lusher earth, which there's a lot of evidence that the earth used to be that way prior to the flood. I mentioned alarmism. A lot of that's going on. We spent a fair amount of time last month talking about the scare tactics and the fear mongering going on, and the idea that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, what does that mean? Well, typically here's the pattern. You show pictures of whatever you want to depict. Then you tell stories of what that picture means. And then you find an expert to interview, and the expert says, yep, it's that bad, it's terrible. And then you show more pictures, tell more stories, get another expert to say, yep, it's that bad, and over and over and over. And you do that on the nightly news. You show pictures about global warming and polar bears on small pieces of ice and ice sheets melting and forest fires going on around the world. We're destroying the planet. So you got forest fires, you got flooding going on, you got hurricanes, you got droughts and famines, you've got diseases, you've got poverty, you've got overpopulation, and you've got pollution, and on and on. You show these pictures night after night after night in the news. You have your narratives, and you have the experts coming on saying, yes, it's that bad. We have to do something. And now the public is sitting there saying, just tell us what to do. We don't want to destroy the planet. We can see how bad it is. We don't want to deny it. This is settled science. We can see it ourselves. It makes sense. And so they're willing to give up more of their freedom, more of their tax money, and on and on and on. It can get really, really contorted. It's kind of a path we're not going to go down too strongly here, but just be aware that that happens, and it's very, very significant. Quick side note, the Andy Griffith Show, my wife was cutting my hair a couple nights ago, and it's the only time I watch TV is when she cuts my hair. I pop it on. We watch a movie once in a while, but turn it on, saw the Me TV, old TV shows. This was one of my favorites. And my sister recently, she was going through a box of old pictures, found a picture of me at a Brewers game. She was going to be here tonight. Something came up. She couldn't be there, but this is my sister, Terry, there at the game. And then I'm in the middle there sitting next to my mom. Reason I'm showing this is my wife teases me. She thinks I look like Opie from the Andy Griffith Show, which I kind of do a little bit. It's interesting to see how his life changed, going from Opie to directing Star Wars, producing it or whatever. Big changes there. But the episode I was watching, there was another boy who was teaching Opie how to throw a temper tantrum. So Opie went in there and he was on the floor just shaking around, and Andy Griffith was just like, what's with this? And he was trying to get his dad's attention and get what he wanted by throwing a temper tantrum. Well, it's kind of what happens with many people. They're throwing a temper tantrum about climate change, and they're not going to stop until they get your attention and get you to say, okay, I'll do whatever. We'll spend more money. We'll commit to doing this. We'll get rid of our cars. We'll just use wind turbines or whatever it is that they're asking us to do, because they're just not going to let up with it. So the television shows show extreme things going on. I talked about Greta last month. I feel sorry for Greta. I think they're using her as a pawn. I'm not blaming her for things, but she's very emotional. And the shaming, how dare you? How dare you do this? And how dare you do that? It's very emotional, and it really kind of tugs at your heart. So a lot of this is going on to get you to do what they want you to do. But I want you to think critically through all these things. So again, critical thinking is a good thing for us to get better and better at. I read a number of articles last month. I'm going to repeat one article, but I'm going to make a different point this time. This was from the San Jose Mercury News from 1989. So roughly 30 years ago. 1989, this is what they said. Entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if global warming is not reversed by the year 2000. They went on to say governments have a 10-year window of opportunity to solve the greenhouse effect before it goes beyond human control. I did some quick math here. In 1989, when this came out, I added the 10-year window on it. I came up with 1999. You can check the math on that. But we have till 1999, a 10-year window from then, to solve this thing, or it goes beyond human control. Well, 1999, that's roughly 21 years ago. So according to them, it's beyond human control. Doesn't pay to do anything anymore because according to them, there's nothing that can be done. Well, you can tell that they were definitely wrong about that, but a lot of alarmism going on with that. Reminded me of a portion of one of my videos on dinosaurs in the Bible. I show Time magazine cover story. It says the truth about dinosaurs. All right, what does that imply? They are going to tell us the truth about dinosaurs. There was a sub caption on this cover, which when I read it, I thought, I don't think they thought through this very far. If they had, I don't think they would have put it on there. This was the subtitle. It says, surprise, just about everything you believe is wrong. Now, I was using critical thinking skills, thinking through that. Surprise, just about everything you believe is wrong. Where did we learn most of what we think we know about dinosaurs? From them, from their magazines and documentaries and all those things in the textbooks. But now they're telling us that we're wrong about all that. So that means they were wrong when they told us. Well, if they were wrong before, how do we know they're not wrong now? If we couldn't trust them before, how do we magically trust them now? Well, now they're right. So they're kind of admitting they were wrong because this changes everything. We could do a series of shows on that title. This changes everything. So many times. Why did they do that? It's sensational. It gets your attention. This changes everything. It's very exciting. Every time they say that, they're saying, we were wrong about what we told you before, but now we're going to tell you the truth. Now, they don't focus on the fact that they were wrong. They're just telling you, now we know something really exciting. Yeah, the other stuff was wrong. Over and over and over. What does that say about science? Just tells us that it's fairly limited. It's a great thing, science, but it's limited, and we're constantly having to correct what we think. And we had the big freeze coming up, the alleged ice age in the 70s that they warned us about. That didn't work out really well for them, so they went to global warming, and now it's basically climate change. Well, just about a week ago, we had the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. I think it was, April 22nd. 50 years since the first Earth Day. We're going to look at some predictions they were making 50 years ago on that first Earth Day. Specifically, we're going to look at 13 failed predictions from Earth Day. This comes compliments of FreedomWorks, freedomworks.com. I got this list from them. It's an interesting list that we will go through now. Failed prediction number 1. Civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against problems facing mankind. That means by 85 or 2000. If action isn't taken by then, it's just going to be over. This was George Wald. He was one of the most prominent scientists back then. Well, that was definitely wrong. Number 2, we are in an environmental crisis which threatens the survival of this nation and of the world as a suitable place for human habitation. Well, that obviously wasn't correct, 50 years ago. Prediction number 3, we must stop pollution and conserve his resources, not merely to enhance existence, but to save the race from intolerable deterioration and possible extinction. Oh, that was obviously wrong, not accurate. Number 4, population will inevitably and completely outstrip whatever small increase in food supplies we make. They went on to say this, the death rate will increase until at least 100 to 200 million people per year will be starving to death during the next 10 years. That's 1970 to 1980. Well, that actually wasn't an issue. Number 5, most of the people who are going to die in the greatest cataclysm in the history of man have already been born. They went on to say by 1975, some experts feel that food shortages will have escalated to the present level of world hunger and starvation into famines of unbelievable proportions. They continue by saying other experts, more optimistic, think the ultimate food population collision will not occur until the decade of the 1980s, just a long time ago, and that didn't happen. Number 6, it's already too late to avoid mass starvation. Too late. That was in 1970. Well, again, that was false. Number 7, demographers agree almost unanimously on the following grim timetable. By 1975, widespread famines will begin in India. These will spread by 1990 to include all of India, Pakistan, China, and the Near East, Africa. By the year 2000, or conceivably sooner, South and Central America will exist under famine conditions. By the year 2000, 30 years from now, the entire world, with the exception of Western Europe, North America, and Australia, will be in famine. Well, obviously, that was wrong as well. Number 8, in a decade, urban dwellers will have to wear gas masks to survive air pollution. By 1985, air pollution will have reduced the amount of sunlight reaching the earth by 1/2. Not even close. That one's way off. At the present rate of nitrogen buildup, it's only a matter of time before light will be filtered out of the atmosphere and none of our land will be usable. Way wrong. Number 10, air pollution is certainly going to take hundreds of thousands of lives in the next few years alone. That was wrong. Number 11, by the year 2000, if present trends continue, we will be using up crude oil at such a rate there won't be any more crude oil. You'll drive up to the pump and say, "Fill her up, buddy," and he'll say, "I'm very sorry, there isn't any." Now, that was back when people would fill your tank. Now we do our own, unless you're in Oregon or something. You still have to do your own there. But that didn't happen. Number 12, one theory assumes that the Earth's cloud cover will continue to thicken as more dust, fumes, and water vapor are belched into the atmosphere by industrial smokestacks and jet planes. Screened from the sun's heat, the planet will cool, the water vapor will fall and freeze, and a new ice age will be born. Way off, wrong with that one. And finally, number 13, the world has been chilling sharply for about 20 years. If present trends continue, the world will be about 4 degrees colder than global mean temperature in 1990, but 11 degrees colder in the year 2000. This is about twice as what would it take to put us into an ice age. Again, very wrong. Now the reverse course, now they're going with the warming trend and all that. So 13 predictions, very bold, all the alarmism of 1970, wrong, 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 again and again and again. Just keep that in mind when you're hearing things today. Are they wrong about everything they say today? You can make up your mind, but just keep this track record in mind when you're hearing new things, because when they say something's going to happen 20 years from now, it's pretty safe to say, because who's going to be around 20 years from now and remember specifically what was said, unless you have other people like me kind of researching, pulling them up and saying, no, they were wrong about that, wrong about that, wrong about that. So again, just use critical thinking skills when you hear the things on television and on the internet today. We talked about forecasting models, that they're only as good as the input we put into them. GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. I won't go into all the details of computer programming that I've done in the past, but I know how this works. And also applying this to today with COVID-19 and all the predictions and forecasts that they made. They initially were forecasting this for the United States, 2 million deaths. Well, to date, we've had about 56,000, and I think a lot of those aren't really even related. People were very unhealthy. They died. It turned out that they had contracted this, but they call it a COVID death. So you have to even question the 56,000. But that's only 2.8% of what they predicted. Their forecasts were way off. They were using bad models that might have been appropriate for other countries, but not for ours. You use bad models, you're going to have bad conclusions, but it worked well for the narrative they wanted to portray to the public. Here's someone I ran across when I was watching a video from PragerU. I can't promote everything they say, only because I haven't seen everything that they have. Everything I've seen so far, I really like. Very professionally done. It's non-sensationalistic. So this was a video that I watched, and there was a guy, Will Happer, very intelligent guy. He kind of knows what he's talking about. Here's his background. He's a physicist, so I kind of like him already. He taught at Columbia University in Princeton for over 5 decades. He published over 200 scientific peer-reviewed papers. He co-authored several books. He was the director of the Office of Energy Research at the U.S. Department of Energy, and he invented something called the sodium guide star. It's used by most telescopes today. There's a lot of turbulence in the atmosphere out there, so when they're taking these videos and pictures of the stars, there's distortions and blurring that goes on. His system helps remove some of that. So sharp guy, atmospheric scientist, he kind of knows his stuff. And he talked quite a bit about these models and how distorted they are and how they kind of front load them and change the logic inside of them to produce the output they want. He talked about a few examples, and it led to some other atmospheric scientists, some quote I got from them. So these models have been consistently and spectacularly wrong in their predictions, and always, amazingly, in the same direction. These predictions, not only spectacularly wrong, but they're always kind of in favor of what they want it to be. Oh, it's just so bad, doom and gloom, the sky is falling. If your models are going to be wrong innocently, sometimes there'll be too much this way, sometimes too much that way. When was the last time you heard a news organization, especially if it's not conservative, say, you know what, wow, we were way off. It's not nearly as bad as we thought. We don't need to take as much tax money. We don't need to restrict your freedoms as much. We're excited about that, and you should be excited too. You never hear that. It's just always really, really bad. And even if it's not that bad, it's still bad, and we still need the money. We still need to do A, B, and C. It's always on that side. That should raise a red flag if you're thinking critically here. We talked about these atmospheric gases and which ones are greenhouse gases, and specifically that water makes up the vast majority of greenhouse gases, but they don't talk about that one because it's not convenient. We're not guilty of producing water. We're guilty of producing, methane and carbon dioxide, right? So they focus on those things. But the models often leave out water. In National Geographic, when they're defining greenhouse gases, they don't even mention the very largest greenhouse gas, water. They just conveniently leave it out. But details matter, and it reminded me of a story that I put in the book that I wrote, a shameless plug there. On one of the pages here, I tell the story here of a guest speaker at a dinner of a leading industrialist. He was introduced as a successful speculator who in 2 weeks made $370 million in uranium. After the speaker had risen to speak and acknowledged the applause, he said that since he was a stickler for details, he wanted first to correct a few in the introduction. And so he did. First of all, he said, it wasn't uranium, it was uranium oxide. Okay. Second, it wasn't 2 weeks, just 10 days. Third, it wasn't 370 million, it was 730 million. Wow. And fourth, I didn't make it, I lost it. The point here with the story is details matter. They matter tremendously. And a lot of the details that we're hearing with climate change have been left out or contorted. There's a lot of cherry picking that goes on with these details. Here's an analogy I came up with. Let's say you're listening to a politician and they are promising that they are going to lower your taxes. Most people want their taxes lowered. So that would be a good thing. Got your attention. You're going to lower your taxes. Truth be told is what they're really going to do is they were going to raise your taxes by 38%. But now they decided, no, we're only going to raise them by 30%. So they've lowered it from raising it 38 to only raising it 30. So on one hand, you could say, oh, they lowered it. But truthfully, honestly, practically speaking, no, they're raising your taxes by 30%. Even they go on TV and claim they're actually lowering your taxes. So the details matter, and they can manipulate things to get you to think what they want you to think and take action they want you to take. Very similar to the whole creation evolution controversy. They tell us that human DNA and chimpanzee DNA is 98% identical. I've covered this in other programs. I'm not going to go through all the details, but this is complete myth. When they were initially doing this, they had the human genome mapped very well, but the chimp genome, didn't get too far on that yet. So they're comparing the two. And they're looking at segments of the chimp genome and comparing it, laying it out against the human genome. Where it matched up fairly well, they said, okay, we're going to put that right here. This is pretty similar. The pieces that didn't match up, they're like, well, that's just too different. You can't compare these two and throw it out. So you only take the pieces that are kind of similar to begin with. So when you're done, you're going to have a high percentage. That's where they came up with the 98, 99% similarity. Today, we have the chimpanzee genome mapped. And now we're down to only 85. It could be even lower than that. That's a 15% difference. That is a massive, massive difference that I've talked about before. When you can consider the human genome of 3 billion letters, 15% is a lot of information. There are a lot of differences there, but they tell you the 98%, it gets your attention even though it's not even accurate. And we have enough story even with the COVID, virus that's going around. One television program, news program, talked about a newborn died of COVID. That gets your attention. It's just supposed to be older people and people who have, diseases, that are being more affected by COVID, right? This was a newborn died of COVID. What did he leave out? He left out the fact that this baby was born 22 weeks premature. It's a 40 weeks gestation. This is born 22 weeks early. It was barely viable to begin with. And it died probably of that. And did it contract COVID? Apparently, but COVID really wasn't the issue. But you leave out one fact, and it allows you to have the narrative that you want. Even Barack Obama, when he was president, what did he say? His statement, 97% of scientists agree climate change is real, it's man-made, and it is dangerous. 3 very bold claims. Where'd that 97% come from? I'll tell you, it's kind of alarming where it really came from, taken out of context. In 2009, there was a survey of about 10,000 Earth scientists. 2 major questions were these. Number 1, do you agree that global temperatures have generally risen since the pre-1800s? Second question, do you think that human activity is a significant contributing factor? 2 interesting questions. Well, a little less than a third of the scientists responded, so about 3,100 scientists did actually respond. Number 1, 90% of these scientists said yes to question number 1. They think that global temperatures have risen since the 1800s, since the little ice age. I'm actually shocked it was only 90%. I would think 100% would say, well, yeah, we've warmed. There's no question here. There's no question at all with number 1. Number 2, 80%, only 80% said yes, they think that human activity was a significant contributing factor. They didn't even define what significant meant was. I'm surprised that a higher amount didn't say that, yeah, humans have contributed, significantly. I'm not saying they didn't done the whole thing, but 20% disagreed and only 80% said yes to that. More interesting, of those who are actually meteorologists, only 64% said yes to number 1, to the second one, that human activity was a significant contributing factor. That means more than a third said, no, we disagree. We don't think human activity is a significant factor. That's huge. And that of those who consider themselves to be climate experts, 77 who consider themselves experts, 75 of the 77 said, yes, human activity is a significant contributing factor. You divide 75 by 77, that's where you get the 97%. So let's put the 97% back into context of what Obama said. He claimed 97% of scientists, that's all scientists, according to his short statement here, 97% of scientists agree climate change is real. Okay, that's not a problem, really. That it's man-made. No, not 97% of all scientists said it's man-made, like it's only coming from man. This is implying, too, that man is the biggest factor. And then last year that it's dangerous. The survey didn't say anything about whether it's dangerous. So this is just complete myth. It's completely wrong. But you make the statement, you say, hey, it's settled science. You can't argue with this. But then you peek under the hood and you're like, wait a minute, that's not correct at all. And we have another guy, Anthony Watts. He's a 25-year broadcast meteorology veteran. He's currently the chief meteorologist at a radio station. He's the founder of this website, What's Up With That? His last name is Watt, so it's kind of clever. This is the world's most visited global warming website. Well, very interesting, a lot of interesting information. Haven't checked the whole thing out, so I can't put my endorsement on the whole thing, but it did have a lot of interesting information. And it talked about the location of the weather stations. Where are they getting these temperature probes from? And in real estate, they say the 3 most important things are location, location, location. It's kind of important, too, where you put your weather station. Turns out that NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, had to take down 600 of their stations because they really weren't in good places for measuring, including one that I think might still be up. It's right next to a steam power plant. Steam power plant, steam, heat. Sunlight coming off the side of the building, weeds growing up around it. Do you think you're going to get an accurate reading there? No, but they have a lot of these stations in places that are going to give them higher temperatures, which is what they want. So they take the data, put it in their models, and tell you global warming is terrible. It's runaway. We got to do something drastic right now. So the third question, how much of this change, if any, is caused by humans? When I brought this up last month, I put up this, crickets chirping. Not because there's no information out there, because I just totally ran out of time to delve into this. I did have some more time to delve into this, but I had the problem with the rabbit trails. There's just so much out there, and a lot of it is kind of useless, and it takes you a while to figure out this isn't helping at all. It's not very specific. It's questionable science. So it's alarmism. So I did do some looking into it, but it's hard to come to an exact conclusion. In fact, you can't come to an exact conclusion on this because of unknowns. Now, if you remember back in school, sometimes you had to solve an equation. There's an unknown. They give you some variables. It might be giving you some nightmares. I mean, I had to do this a lot in physics. And there are unknowns in climate change. In fact, there are multiple unknowns in climate change. And when you have multiple unknowns, that makes things extremely difficult to figure out, virtually impossible to figure out. And one of the biggest unknowns is actually clouds. Like, wait a minute, clouds, they're simple. They're just these fluffy things that float around. No, these things are incredibly complex. There's something actually called cloud physics. And they go into a lot of details of clouds and how thick they are and how they move and all this. It's extremely complex. We can't predict their movements very well. You cannot predict the movements of water either. So think about it. The Earth is 70% covered with liquid water. And you got exchanges going with the water that's up in the atmosphere and back and forth. You can't figure out either individually. And now you got the two interacting with each other, which makes this whole thing of climate change and climate predictions basically impossible. It's a can of worms. We got other things with solar activity. I mentioned last month a little bit, something called solar particle forcing. It gets very, very complex. When you think about Hurricane Irma back in 2017, what did they tell us? It's going to come up here, it's going to hit Miami directly, and then go up the east coast of Florida. Well, what actually happened? Well, it came up kind of towards Miami, but then it took a totally different turn and went up the west coast there. They were watching this every day. They had tons and tons of real-time data, and they were completely wrong with what happened. They couldn't predict what was going to happen 2 days later. Am I blaming them? No, I'm just saying this is really hard. So if we don't know what's going to happen 2 days later when we're watching it develop, what are they doing telling us what's going to happen 30 or 50 years from now? There's no way they could possibly know. Mountain streams. Mountain streams affect things a lot. I just read an article 2 days ago. ICR had it on their website. This is what they were saying. Mountain streams release 184 million tons of carbon globally each year. That's a lot of carbon just coming from mountain streams. In fact, that's roughly the same amount total global output of CO2 from tropical streams and their floodplains. Yet mountain streams cover a lot smaller area, but they're a significant contributing factor to our climate. You got to factor that in along with many, many other unknowns. Then you have the Genesis flood. It's a whole nother topic. I'm currently working on a 3-part series on the flood. This was a massive, massive event that happened roughly 4,500 years ago, and it changed everything, and it caused a lot of climate change drastically in a short period of time. And just one small element that I'll mention in the time remaining we have here. The oceans were heated up greatly, probably to over 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, the average surface temperature is about maybe 62 degrees. Some areas are much colder than that. Some areas are warmer. Average 62. But the temperature just after the flood, at the ending stages and after, was much, much warmer. A lot more evaporation. In fact, it's generally what led to us having an ice age. I say ice ages. The secular scientists talk about multiple ice ages over millions of years, for a number of reasons that I was going to go into, but we don't have time to talk about it. But they talk about the Milankovitch theory, and it has to do with astronomical activity and the motion of the Earth as it goes around the sun. There's a lot of problems with that theory and reasons why it's off, but they use that to generate models today. And if that's off, their models are going to be off. But even this can't account for the climate change that we think we're seeing here today. Not enough of an effect, so they had to add something else. They needed an accomplice to go along with this. Well, what was it? Well, it's CO2 being released by mankind. Here's the European Environment Agency. It says it's no surprise that the warming of the oceans has accounted for 93% of the warming of the planet since the 1950s. This warming has happened as a result of increasing emissions of greenhouse gases, most importantly, carbon dioxide. So the oceans are warming, and we're a large contributor here because we are releasing too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and this is really what's causing all the disasters. So therefore, we need to completely change our lives to make a big change here. Again, there's a lot more I could say about that, reasons why that can't be as big of a factor, but what is our response to all this? There are so many unknowns and so much going on, and you hear things from all over, especially the secular media. They're going to basically tell you one narrative over and over and over. Or as a people as a whole, all around the world, what is our response? Well, one of them I mentioned last month, the Paris Climate Agreement. It was drafted in 2015, signed in 2016. It's basically 178 of the world's leaders came together to sign this thing. It's kind of a feel-good thing. Sometimes they use the phrase virtue signaling, and I don't want to be too condescending with that, but it's basically where you do something and you're signaling, we care, so we're actually doing something. And sometimes good things actually happen, but a lot of times it's more of just trying to tell everyone else that you care so much. But what really came out of this agreement? Well, again, you peek under the hood, look at the details, not very impressive at all. The countries that came, they didn't even have to mention greenhouse gases in what they submitted. That's pretty significant. They basically either pledged to do what they were already doing, or in some cases, even less. In fact, India didn't make a pledge to limit their emissions at all. They only to become more efficient, whatever that means. It actually represented a reduction compared to what they were currently doing. And then my favorite, Pakistan, to reach a peak at some point, after which to begin to reduce emissions. That's real specific. I mean, that's so vague that could mean anything. And then we had China. They said that they would reach a peak CO2 emissions by 2030, which is what the United States was guessing that they would do. So that's convenient. Yeah, what you're guessing, that's what we're going to do. In reality, they were pledging to increase for the next 15 years from basically 2015 to 2030. They're pledging we're going to keep increasing for 15 years, at which we will then level off. They didn't say they were ever going to decrease anything. We're going to keep increasing for 15 years, and then we'll kind of level off. Well, how is that going to help anything? And then you got the United States over pledging. We're the only ones who really did anything significant and too much. Obama basically pledged spending $100 billion to reduce greenhouse emissions while allowing China to build 800 more coal plants during the next 5 years. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The organizers admitted that if everyone does everything they agreed upon through 2030, it will accomplish only 1% of what would be necessary to meet their goal of a 2 degrees Celsius temperature drop. That's crazy, doing everything they want us to do to only accomplish 1% of what they think needs to be done. The cost to accomplish this 1%, they say it costs about $1 to $2 trillion per year through 2030. That is a phenomenal amount of money to do almost nothing. Then Obama pledged even more through the Clean Power Plan. And he said, even if it's the mandates of this Clean Power Plan are implemented for the rest of the century, by the year 2100, the temperature reduction will only be 0.023 degrees Fahrenheit. That is nothing. Then if you include additional proposed measures that were very vaguely outlined, the combined reduction will only be 0.057 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. Again, that's nothing. Then, if you add everything the U.S. was promising and considering to the Paris Climate Agreement, the reduction will only be 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. That is absolutely ludicrous. So you got a 0.3% Fahrenheit reduction. So what they're saying is this orange line across the top here is what would happen if we don't do anything. But if we spend tons and tons of money and do all these things and give up our lives, basically, we could postpone this global warming by 4 years. That's it. We're going to end up in the same place. It will just take us 4 years longer to get there, doing everything we're supposed to do. And what's the cost of doing all this? Well, $1 to $2 trillion per year, which when you add all that up to get this 0.3 degree Fahrenheit change, by the end of the century is going to cost us $100 trillion. And we're just kind of numb to this. Oh, yeah, that's a lot of money. No, that's an unbelievable amount of money. That's just not even doable. But we're willing to do that. Well, we got to do that to save the planet, which reminded me of someone that I know who, let's say they're thinking of getting certain vitamins because, vitamins are good and they make you healthy. And someone might say, well, man, those vitamins, if you get all those vitamins you're thinking of getting, it's going to cost you like $230 a month just for those vitamins. Oh, well, that's nothing compared to $75,000 it might cost me. If I get sick and go to the hospital, my insurance won't cover it. It's like, wait a minute. They go to drastic extremes. If I don't have these vitamins, I might get really sick and have to go to the hospital and have bills that are so large I can't even, afford it then. It's like, well, just because you don't take the vitamins doesn't mean you're going to end up in the hospital with bills of $75,000 or $300,000 or some extreme thing. But that's what they want us to think. If we don't spend $100 trillion, the planet's going to die. We're going to all go extinct. All the continents are going to be underwater by whatever year. So they go to these extremes to scare us into saying, okay, we'll spend the money. Just tell us what we need to do. So wrapping this whole thing up, perspective. Perspective is important. Why do I have a pelican on here? Because I can. What does it have to do with perspective? Nothing. I just thought it looked kind of goofy. But perspective, let's just kind of think through all these things. This is just one angle. We could go for 3 more hours on perspective. I'm just going to wind this down very, very quickly. I personally think we care in general as humanity more about the environment than we do about human life. COVID recently, U.S. deaths, I just checked it today, 56,876 people. That's 0.017% of the total population in the United States. I'm very sad that those people died. Now, I think a lot of those, it really wasn't the virus. But the numbers are telling us, okay, those are the numbers. But it's still a very small percentage of the population. Now we need to lock ourselves in our houses and shut down businesses and destroy our economy to save 0.1.7% of the population. Perspective. Roe v. Wade, the decision on abortion back in 1973. Since that decision was made, we've killed basically almost 62 million babies. 62 million actual deaths because of abortion versus a few thousand people who are dying. Some of, maybe it really was this virus. We're doing a lot more to quick save people from dying of the virus while we're just killing baby after baby after baby. It's a whole nother topic here, but think about it. This is crazy. What does God think? Do we need to make good decisions about the environment and viruses? Yeah, but we're going way overboard there, and we just let this keep happening. This number just keeps going up. Well, yeah, what can you do? We could do a lot about this, but most people are doing almost nothing. But man, we need to save the seals or the spotted owl or whatever we might want to do. Biblical response, I mentioned this last week, Genesis 8:22. While the earth remaineth, seedtime and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. We're always going to have the seasons God promised us. That doesn't mean we don't do anything. We need to be good stewards of this planet. We need to recycle plastics, and we need to maybe reduce our emissions and look at some green energy things if it's reasonable. We need to do reasonable things, but we don't need to destroy our lives and our economy and all that on data that's coming in that's very skewed and alarmism and panicking, and the sky is falling. So there's got to be a balance. We need to be good stewards, but what they're asking us to do is way overblown based on science that I don't think is good science. And it's really not a science problem. It's a scientist opinions problems. And we're only really hearing one opinion through the media day after day after day. So again, we left a lot of things uncovered, but it's more than I even wanted to look into. I think this is interesting. To be honest, this pales in comparison to my interest in the authority of God's word and everything else it says about who owns this universe to begin with, who owns life, who created us, why we're really here, and what's going to happen to us when we die. All those things are a lot more important. And so we'll be spending a lot more time on those things in future shows and videos we produce and our website and articles that I write focused on the authority of God's word. What does it have to say to us today? This is kind of a little tangent, but it's an important topic that we need to think through and have not only a good scientific response, but a good biblical response as well. So we're going to take a quick break here and come back with, there's not a lot of time left for Q&A, kind of like last month again, but we'll get in a few questions. I'll see you in just a minute. All right, we are back. We're going to do some Q&A. I apologize ahead of time. We just had so much information. We're cut a little bit short doing some Q&A. Plus, I haven't had supper yet, and I'm having pizza. I'm really hungry. So we're going to take, I think, a couple questions for this evening. You can contact us through our website, though, anytime, thestartingpointproject.com. Send us more questions, email them. You can even call us, whatever. A lot of material on there as well. But we'll go with the first question we have for this evening, which is Peter from Wisconsin. Have there been glaciers that have melted back and relics of past human activity have been found? Basically, yes. About 30% of the earth was covered with ice. There's a lot of evidence. We don't doubt that at all. Again, I think the mechanics of it go back to the flood. The flood's really the only thing that could have caused an ice age. Skip the details on that for now because I've covered it before and we're running short on time here. But there certainly was an ice age caused by the flood. Glaciers came down. I live here in Wisconsin. We've had glaciers come in this area. We see the physical effects of it. Glaciers, kettles, moraines, terminal eskers, just different things we see were formed by glaciers. And they have since melted back. We expected that. We expected the ice to be increasing after the flood, and it got to a maximum, and it has melted back since that time. So we expect to have seen that, and we do. The people were alive during the ice age. When the flood finished, Noah, his family came off the ark, animals came off the ark, and then they went, spread around, and filled the earth. That was during the beginning of the ice age, and it has melted back to where it is today. So we could see where it and how far it went, how far back it has melted, and we see remnants of animals that were living in those areas and people that were alive during that time. Again, a lot more information about that, but life was thriving during the ice age. If you lived around the equator, you'd have no clue that there even was an ice age at that point. But certainly evidence for that, and the Bible is really the only thing that explains it. Specifically, secular scientists, again, have a hard time explaining why there would even be an ice age. But good question. Next question, Milton in Utah. Don't you think this whole climate debate is not only contributing to alarmism, as you said, but to sway the entire populace into some level of control? Short answer, personally, yes. It can get into different conspiracy theories and all that. I don't even think you have to go into the conspiracy theories. It's just kind of obvious what happens. A crisis comes up. It is so bad. We're kind of desperate. It's like, okay, this is so bad. Help us. Okay, we'll help you. But what we have to do is we have to have these programs in place to be able to help you. But the way to have the programs is to fund them. So we're going to need some more tax dollars to do that. Now we have to set up new bureaucracies and hire people to fund that. And these things generally never get reversed. Once a new system comes in place, it's always going to be there. It's going to fund it on and on and on. I mean, you can look at historically of things that have come up that they said were temporary fixes, and they're still with us today because it's a source of income for them, probably not efficient use of the income, but we do give up control. I mean, look at us. We're willing to stay locked up in our houses because we're so desperately afraid of this virus killing us. Well, we're starting to wise up and realize it's not as bad as they've been telling us. We still need to be cautious and do proper things, but do we all need to be locked up in our homes and destroying our economy and businesses, and small business owners are losing their businesses left and right, and some of them will never recover? I think that's too extreme, but we've given up our rights to do that, and it's a form of control. It's not these dark secret meetings and dark rooms that they're having. Oh, they're nefarious and gonna do this. No, it's just human nature. People like to control other people, and here's an opportunity. Hey, the virus. What can we do with that? Well, we see what's happening worldwide with this, and this is just conditioning us for another virus next time. Well, you know what happened last time? It was killing all these people. We got to do it again, and we're going to need some more money because we didn't handle it the best way last time because we didn't have enough money, and we need more hospitals and more masks and on and on and on. So, and we'll say, well, you know what? What else can we do? What options do we have? So we give more money, we give up more of our freedoms, and it's a pattern that we get into. And again, you don't need conspiracies. Just take a look at the Bible. When you read how things end, it gets a lot worse before it gets better. And the Bible talks about a one world government. We're leaning that way, and we're going to need central authorities, right, to tell the world what to do. You can't have an individual country bucking the system. You need someone from the UN or wherever to say, this is what we're doing as a world, not just as an individual country. You can see that playing out. We're ready for that. And I'm not saying we're living, right now in the tribulation, but we're starting to see things happening that are going to be even worse during the tribulation period that the Bible talks about. So we should be aware of that and be using that as an opportunity to talk to others to say, hey, what do you think about what's going on? They'll give you their opinion, and then you can give them your opinion on how it fits in what the Bible was predicting all along, and we're starting to see those things happen. You get their attention, and you can tell them more about what the true solution is. It's not a vaccine. The true solution is Jesus Christ, which is what this ministry is all about. Telling people about Jesus Christ. He's the true Savior of the world, their only hope. God is still on the throne, and there's only room for one. So I appreciate you tuning in this month. Again, we're not sure when the next broadcast is going to be, but we're thinking about it. But sign up for our newsletter, and then you'll be notified when the next program is going to be. So thank you again so much for hanging in there, listening to me talk a million miles an hour. And hope it was encouraging in some way to help you think critically through these things. You don't need to panic. None of this is a surprise to God. He's not panicking, so we don't need to panic either. Stay in God's word. All of the answers are there, and we look forward to seeing you next time. God bless.